All
Okay.
right.
That is a fun intro. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, that took me, I kid you not, that took me like 5.5 hours.
Oh, I was gonna guess much more than that. Like, that's
Yeah.
impressive work.
It took,
Yeah, well done.
I think total, if I had to count like collecting all the clips
Yeah,
and
yeah,
things like that, probably a lot more. But the actual putting everything
putting it
together,
together. Yeah.
very long time. Very
Yes,
long
I
time.
believe that. Like, that
Oh,
was I know what goes into that kind of thing. It's like, well
that's
done.
so you liked it? You felt honored by that? You feel,
Oh
if it
my
was,
gosh. I'm
you
like,
feel like it's
"You
worth?
see me
Okay,
dancing?"
cool.
I was over here
Yeah.
dancing. Loved
Yeah,
it.
I wanted to make sure that you felt like we're going hard for Dr. Bird, like we're throwing it down.
I love it. Aw, you're so sweet.
Thanks. Well, Dr. Bird, thank you so much for
Yes.
coming on and chit-chatting with me.
Thanks for
Last time
having
I
me.
spoke to you, we were on a live stream that was supposed to be about academics, and then and then I accidentally somehow got everybody to start showing their tattoos.
You did.
I did, and I'm proud of that, and I stand by
Mhm.
that decision
You
because,
should be
ladies
very
and
proud of that.
gentlemen, you need to yes and yourself. Nobody will yes and you if you don't.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
support your
mhm.
decisions. But that being said, this is about your actual work and your academia and your ideas and your thoughts and your expertise. And then, like, at the end, in the paid version, maybe your tattoo, like in
Okay.
the back of your hand.
I could do a better job giving you a screenshot of my tattoo.
There we go.
I
There
think
we
I gave
go.
you ours one last time.
So, for anybody who has never met you before or is unfamiliar with your work, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, what you're here
Yeah.
to talk about.
Okay, great. Yeah. Well, again, thank you for including me in your week of Skeptic University. It's fun to be here. It's fun to
Yeah,
talk
thanks
with
for
you
being here.
again, and it's really nice
Yeah.
to be here. Thank you. So what do I do? What do I do? So at this point, I consider myself a independent public biblical scholar. So you know, how much of the background do you want? Like, I have grew up Christian,
You
grew up
have a lot.
Methodist, given
Yeah.
the funding. Yeah, grew up Methodist. Undergrad, I did a math major, started as an engineer, and I finished as a math major.
Wow.
Yeah, because, I was into
You
math.
finished as a math major? Like, you
Yeah,
kept with it the whole time?
I did.
Jeez, I'm
Loved it.
impressed.
Loved
I'm
it.
impressed.
Yeah, thank you. And then but I was also a volunteer, young life volunteer, so I was doing ministry, like, trying to, as the language used is bring kids to Christ, right? Lead
Yes.
kids to Christ. I was doing that for all 4 years, and then I was, on staff with Young Life for 2 years after college, and a couple years passed, and then I ended up going to seminary because I wanted to.
Wow.
Yeah, I had someone show me, like, a radically different translation of the Martha Mary passage. It, like,
Interesting.
shifted my life. Like, I had a cosmic shift thing happen in my world. Yeah,
Interesting.
it was intense, and it was based on just like looking at the Greek and doing something different with just one phrase in there. And I thought, if that can happen from one phrase, I
Yeah.
want to be the one who knows what the translation, who's working with the translation, because I feel like maybe I've been misled on some things.
Yeah,
So,
if a phrase is gonna change your life,
right?
be able to know what that phrase says, at least, like,
Right,
verbatim.
at the very least. And then what else are we missing, right? So I went to seminary so I could study biblical Hebrew and Greek, actually. I didn't
That's
go because,
awesome.
yeah, thanks. I didn't go because I wanted to be minister or anything like that. In fact, when I went, I didn't think women should be ordained. So,
Right,
like, yeah,
right? A
yeah,
lot of people think that. That's a
of
very
course.
common thought process.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially
Yeah.
from, kind of conservative and fundy
Yeah. Yep.
places. So,
Yep.
yeah. So anyway, so went to seminary. It started like, oh my gosh, all these things I'm learning, not just the languages, but then like learning about the development of the doctrines and learning about all,
Right.
and I'm like, what? And I'm having all
Right.
these moments of like, I don't agree with your premise, so I'm not going to agree
Right.
with where you're going with this. And this is
Yeah.
making me angry, and like
Right.
over and over and over. And so I had this thing since I had been, I loved the Bible, right? I loved scripture.
Right.
And as long as, and I realized at one point in seminary, as long as women are reading these scriptures the way I'd been taught to read them, then there was some work to be done because
Right.
they needed to know something different. So that's what got me
Right.
to PhD work. Yeah.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, yeah. And so, I went to Vanderbilt for my PhD work. And
Is that the one here in Nashville?
yes,
Cool.
yeah,
Very cool.
yeah. Loved it. Loved it. Actually, I started at Baylor with PhD work, long story, and that almost killed me.
I I've
I'm not
heard
actually exaggerating.
stories about
Yeah.
Baylor, so I believe that.
And the way that they literally wouldn't let me ask questions, like they shut me down. They literally silenced me in seminars, and yeah, it was.
Do you think it was because you were a woman?
Oh, no question. Like one of the professors said, "Oh, not even a question." Yeah, like halfway through the first semester, this guy, one of the professors, very kind, right? Very kind.
Yeah.
We had to do oral exams halfway through, so you're just tell him that show that you've been reading. And I'm in his office, and he says, "So, good job on your exam. Now, are you sure you're going to be comfortable here? Because you're asking questions we just don't ask."
Do we not?
Yeah, exactly. No, he actually said that to me. And so from there on out, he would counter everything I said. He would like shut me down. Anyway, so that was awful, but it was also a really good experience. I mean, really awful, but it was also a good experience, and then made me appreciate every single day that I was at Vanderbilt.
Yeah,
like
I bet.
I woke up thankful and happy to go. Right. So
this podcast is sponsored by Vanderbilt University, located in Nashville, Tennessee. Vanderbilt. We call it Vandy because we are happy.
Yes. Yeah. So what my deal is, just to kind of wrap up this, I have a problem doing this. I talk and talk and talk. And
but here's the thing:
to get to
your
the point.
face is literally just on that intro. Like you are allowed to talk.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I'm just saying, like, this is about you. This is your hour, so you can talk. I promise.
Here's the deal. The reason I went to seminary, the reason I went to PhD, right, is to like, oh my gosh, more people need to know this information, right? And so when I got out, my first teaching position was at Greensboro College in North Carolina, and small liberal arts college. And I just kept having students say, either in class or come up to me afterwards and say, I wish I could share this class discussion with my family, with my pastor, my youth. And so finally I was like, I think I need to write that book, because not everybody can get into a college classroom.
Right.
But this was like life-changing stuff for people. So that's why I do what I do. So, so my second book, my first book is my dissertation that's published. And then my second book is Permission Granted. And that's basically take the Bible into your own hands. And it's basically like walking through the most important conversations that we had in intro courses to both testaments, right? The Old Testament.
Right. And one of the things I think I said this to you before, but one of the things I liked about your work as I was looking you up before for the one that ended up, I don't know why I looked you up, because we just talked about like tattoos the whole time. I ruined that stream. I'm so sorry. Skeptic
It was
Haven.
fun.
I thought it was fun. I thought it was fun. Is that I could not figure out what side of the coin you were on. And I liked that. And I liked that I had no idea from reading your writing if you were still a religious person, if you were deconstructed, if you were atheist. If I could not tell. And I think that's, one, hard to do. So that's like, congrats.
Thank you.
And two, I think that's cool, because I think that will kind of include a lot more people. I can read it and not feel like I'm being proselytized to. And people who are still very religious can read it and not, I feel like, have a bias towards believing you or not believing you based on what they know your background to be. And so if anybody is watching and they're like, why aren't you asking her more about her personal beliefs? That's on purpose. Because that's one thing I don't want to know, honestly, unless you feel like telling me, and then you're welcome to share. But I feel like that anonymity was neat.
Thank you for.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, it's hard. No, it's hard to do. It really is. As somebody who's studying writing right now, your bias goes into everything.
Totally.
Like whether you like it or not, right? And yours doesn't. So congrats. You're a robot. Congratulations. You don't have feelings or emotions.
Are you calling me a sociopath? Yeah.
Yeah. You're like, maybe I should speak to somebody about that. Now that I'm saying it out loud, maybe you should see somebody. So yeah, tell us a little bit about your book, Permission Granted, and your favorite parts, or you told us just now, I feel like, kind of what inspired it. But if people had to walk away from Permission Granted with a one general idea, walking away thinking at the end of the day, this is what they remember about it, or this is what they took from it, what would you want that to be?
All questions are welcomed.
Baylor. Looking at you, Baylor. This podcast is not sponsored by Baylor because we don't like bitches. Oh my gosh.
You are so fun. Yeah, like that was, I mean, bring your questions. Like there are none that are off limits. That's kind of like, that's my takeaway on, I think, so many people, and I imagine you experienced this. I imagine you've talked, so many people who did, that they were told to stop asking questions in Sunday school.
Me included. Me
Yeah, I
included.
bet. No, I
Yes.
had a feeling, right? Because
Yep.
you're doing this kind of thing.
Yep.
I imagine you've always been like this, right?
Yes. Yes.
And you started asking the questions that the Sunday school teacher either was scared of or, whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Or they didn't know. And instead of handling it the way that you should handle a question you don't know, which is by saying, that's a great question. I'm not sure. Maybe let's look into this together. Maybe I'm going to go home and look it up and come back to you. I can't compute.
shut it down.
You are the problem.
Right.
Don't do that again,
Exactly.
Baylor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's, when I summarize the book, that's what I say, what you put on the thumbnail, critical thinking meets reading the Bible. That's
right.
And not to be afraid of that, right? It's
right. Absolutely.
One of the things that I put it in the introduction to that book was the thing that got me through seminary, where I was, it's interesting. This language of deconstructing is a really interesting label. And so I honor it. I respect it. But what's funny is it's really just becoming more informed.
Yes.
It's not.
Yes.
Like you don't.
Dr. Bird, you have managed to verbalize something I've been trying to verbalize forever now. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm writing that down.
Good.
Yeah, but no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
And so what helped me survive, whatever that was, right? Pulling it apart and like looking at it differently and putting it back were these two ideas, convictions that I had. One was, God gave me my brain, so it has to be okay to use it, especially in this most important part of my life, right?
Especially when you want to learn more about the Bible.
Right. And then the second one was, if God and the Bible cannot handle my questions of them, they don't deserve my devotion. Right?
Dropping the truth. That's
right.
That's so true.
Right?
That's so true.
We our partners in life can handle our questions. That's why they're our partners, right? They can handle it. They want to.
Right.
So
sometimes they want to. Sometimes they also are just in the space when we ask them and they have to, I don't know about your house, but that's how it is in my house.
Yeah. Well, they signed up for it for the long run, I guess.
Yeah, want is a strong word.
Yeah. That's so funny. But so anyway, so those are kind of the quick, like, this is what it is, this is what I'm doing, bring your questions. My intention is to honor people and to seek to help people find ways to confront this, read or whatever the Bible without it harming them or without harming others with it. And and to be able to say, to go from a person that I was who said that every word is directly inspired by God, right? And and therefore I thought of as being as perfect as God is, right? I imagine you did as well as a fundie, right? Yep. So to go from that to, okay, I can look at this story and I can, I don't believe that the way God is being described as a petty, childlike person without, critical, without, I don't know, good relational skills, like I can look at it and see that's what's happening here. And I'm not okay with, I don't believe that's, if there's a God out there, I don't believe that's what God is.
He did make men in his image. That's what I'm saying. Whoa, got the hot takes here on Skeptic University. Hot takes.
That's really fun. Anyway, but to be able to do that and say, okay, and it doesn't like undo me to say, yeah, I don't like what that's depicting. And that's actually harmful. Oh,
yeah.
To be able to do that and say, okay, yeah, we need to be able to name that as harmful.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, how do you, when you're making these interpretations and when you're basically describing and breaking down and getting the meaning from the Bible, how do you keep people from saying, you're doing the same thing that I'm doing, you're just making it sound like what you want?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's, that is a thing that people will say. And It's a hard, I'm not sure how to answer that, to be honest, because the thing that I most want to say is
Gonna get us
I
demonetized.
yeah, the thing I most want to say is that I don't need the Bible to say anything in particular at all.
Ah,
And so,
interesting.
yeah, and so that for some people that diminishes my authority because I'm saying, it's not,
Yes.
I'm saying it's not my authority. But
Right.
but it allows me to come at it much more as objectively as possible. I don't,
Yeah.
as you noted, right? Bias
Yeah.
is a thing,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
we cannot do anything without some sort of, object. We are always, there's always an element of us. So
Yeah.
it's nothing can be completely objective. But,
Right.
like when I was writing the book Marriage in the Bible that came out this past fall, you know, it was my intent to look at what's going on here, not just the 4 passages that people turn to say this is what biblical marriage looks like. I get that, and I address that in the first 4 chapters. I was like, but let's just be honest about the rest of it. And I might be surprised by something I discover. I might, and I'm okay with that. And I think that's important. And, so I'm not looking to justify or back up anything in particular. I'm trying to see what's going on.
And I think that's a great answer. That's a really great answer. When you're like, I don't there's nothing I need it to say, so why would I skew what it says? That's a good answer.
Well, thank you.
That's a really yeah, yeah, and especially because everything else that you do seems neutral. Like, it seems like I didn't read anything on your website or, like, when I was Googling you, or when I was, like, following you in your neighborhood. Just kidding, I wasn't following you. We've been locked in to ICE. I had to cancel that plan. Um, that that had any bias leaning in any way. So it truly seems like a casual, I'm curious about what it says. There's nothing I'm trying to get out of this.
Hmm.
There's no winning this. I'm just curious what it says. And I think a lot of people on either side of the coin need it to say something.
That's right.
People on like the non-religious side, oftentimes, not everyone, need
Mhm.
it to say something that validates their ability to demonize it, to say like this is bad. And then people on the religious side need something in it to say this is the word of God, this is the most perfect and holy book. um and I remember I used to be in debate, and I remember they used to say,
Mm.
if you are looking for something that meets what you're looking for, you will find it.
You
You
will.
will find. Now, whether or not it's from a very valid source, that like, don't worry about that. You'll find it. And you know what I mean? And like, if
Yeah.
2016 taught us nothing, people will find what they're
Mhm.
looking for
Mhm.
all over the place,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
It might
Mhm.
be on like a Weebly blogspot dot,
Oh my
whatever,
gosh,
or
that's awesome.
right.
Yeah.
Right. And it might have like alerts pop up when your antivirus is like, you sure about that? But you can find what you're looking for. And so it's interesting to go just in a very neutral perspective. Now, that being said, do you still sometimes get disappointed by what you find, even though there wasn't necessarily any narrative you were looking for?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question because am I disappointed in what I find all the time? Because
Interesting. That's
well,
actually really interesting.
um, maybe I didn't mean that in the way that you took it.
Well, I mean, like, even when there's not a specific thing you're looking for, you can still be bummed out by the answer, if that makes
Right,
sense.
right,
Yeah.
but, what bums me out is just how consistently awful it is, and to keep discovering more and more depths of this is especially around the topic of marriage in the Bible, the extent to which women are property, the extent to which women are thought of and depicted
Right.
as baby makers, not
Right.
solely, but that's where people focus their attention and it's in there, the extent to which yada yada yada. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
like one of the things in particular I'm thinking of is the 2 lines in the Levitical laws. So Leviticus 18:22 and then 20:13, which I imagine those are the 2 verses that say you shall not lie with a man as you lie with a woman. It's an abomination. And in one of them, you're to be killed for it. I've heard, some, but by the way, I'm an ally, so I'm not
Mm,
okay. So,
right.
but
We're literally just talking about the document and what it says.
yes,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. And yeah.
Unfortunately.
Exactly. And I've
Yeah.
heard people say, well, it is about procreation. It is about some of these other things, but it is also about an ancient form of homophobia. Let's just be
Yes.
clear.
Right.
And
Yep.
for a few years, I just wanted to focus on that. Well, this is really about them needing to procreate and don't waste the semen, right? No,
It's also
it's
about
also
just not liking people that you don't
exactly,
like, that you get
exactly,
weird feelings when you
right,
see them be
right.
themselves. Yeah. Yep.
Exactly. We need
Yep.
to name that, right?
Yes.
So that's a thing
Interesting.
that's disappointing, right? You're like,
Yes.
yeah, it's
Yes.
also that.
Yeah, and you can go into something with a completely open mind on what you're gonna find and still find awful stuff.
You can,
Like,
yeah.
and I'm just gonna be honest, there's a lot of awful stuff in the Bible. There is.
There
Even
is.
even at my most devout, that was something that I knew, was there was a lot
Mm,
of bad stuff, and
mm.
there you were either taught what to say, like, "Oh, well, that it was a different time, the
How to make it.
translation is off."
Mhm.
Right, or you just stopped asking about it, like, this
Right.
just
God's ways are higher than ours, and
right,
yeah.
right. And one thing that I've always thought, and I've probably said this like 10 times this week at this point, is I at least in that regard, I gotta say, I have a certain level of respect for people like Calvinists who
Mhm,
look at that stuff and they say, "That is what it says. That's what it
mhm,
means." They don't
mhm.
hide from it. They don't pretend it's not. They don't pretend it means anything different. They say, you can say anything. You can be like, "Oh, so in this verse, are they saying to like rape and kill women?" Yep. It's like, "Oh, okay." I'm
Yeah.
just so used to, "No, it's a translation thing. That's not how it is." Which is always odd. I always also I think it's interesting that it's a translation problem until it says what you want, and then you're like, "No,
Totally.
that
It's
they
really
translated that
legit.
correct, by
Yeah.
the way." Um, and so has there ever been a point where you came upon a part of the Bible where you're like, "I don't know that I will ever be the same having read this," or, "I don't know
Yes.
that I can ever enjoy this knowing what I just learned."
Well, enjoy is not really how I think about, reading the Bible. Um,
Listen, you and me both.
okay, I was like, well, but I have had a couple things that I just won't see it the same, and I think
Yeah.
it
"Oh,
doesn't
no,
bother me.
Deuteronomy is still boring. Now it's just boring and horrible. Thank you." "Oh, no, I'm going to stop enjoying reading chapters of the Bible every night to fall asleep. Oh, no."
Well, so can I share 2 examples
Oh,
of
yeah.
things that have like,
Go
"Oh
for it.
my gosh, you can't unknow that," and it just changed everything for me
Yeah,
in a certain way. So there were
yeah.
2. One, and it came from, scholarship that I was just, seeking, doing the searches and reading what's out there. And one was this article on the reference to the eunuchs in Matthew 19. So, I'm talking to you thinking you probably know exactly what I'm referring to
I
because you
don't
probably know
remember.
scripture really well. So it's in the passage where,
I gotta be honest with you before we go any
sorry,
further. When I was in church, I got in so much trouble for only ever quoting John 3:16. They gave me a lot. Like, literally, when I would come up to read my Bible verses, they would make me stop and go, "Are you just gonna say John 3:16?" And I'd be like, "No." And they'd be like, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, I promise." And then I would just say it. So,
say,
you're giving me a
that's
lot
awesome.
more credit than I deserve.
Oh, okay. Well, whatever. Um, so Matthew 19, this is one of the verses 4 to 6 is one of the verses that people will say, "Oh, this is part of what biblical marriage looks like," or this defines biblical marriage for me.
Oh, no.
There are 4 passages, by the way, a total of 7 verses that define that biblical marriage thing, um,
Mm,
which is hilarious, right? Given
right.
that 7 verses out of the thing. Okay, that's when they say, "Hey, Jesus, for which reason do you allow divorce?" And then they have that little exchange about like, "Well, don't you know that God, made the male and female, and then what God joined together, let no one separate." Well, but then that's where people stop quoting is right there in verse 6. But if you keep going, right, they're like, "Yeah, but what about Deuteronomy 24 that allows us to divorce?" And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And then the disciples respond. This is where it gets really interesting. the disciples listening to this whole exchange say, if that's the case, so he says, that's when he lays out that thing about like, like, this is the case. And even just lusting after a woman, you're already committing adultery,
Yeah, like gouge your eyes out.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And his disciples say, well, if that's the case, it's better not to marry to begin with. And he doesn't disagree. Yeah.
What?
And then it gets exactly.
Well, I'm just gonna...
But also, like, that's not a family values Jesus. The one who says it's better not to marry to begin with, right? And then
all the quiverfuls. Don't tell them.
Exactly. We need to tell them.
Don't tell them. Don't tell the Duggars. Don't tell them.
The next line is the one about the eunuchs. And he says, and I tell you, basically, right, not everyone can handle this, but there are some who are born eunuchs. There's some who are made eunuchs by others. There's some who make themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom. Anyone who can should accept this.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So Jesus tells men to cut off their testes, right?
Right.
That's a real man, is one who is without.
Do you hear that, guys, in the comments?
You know what I'm saying?
You hear that?
So what the church did is in the 4th century, this started leading to problems, actually. There were so many men who were castrating themselves for the sake of the kingdom. Yeah, truly. I'm not kidding. Very first decree of the very first ecumenical council, Nicene Council, right? First decree is, if you have castrated yourself, you cannot be a leader in the church. Just going to do away with that.
Whoa.
And nobody talks about that, right? Okay. And so then bishops in the church started taking it to mean Jesus was talking about celibacy.
Oh, no. All these men are like, no. He wasn't. No, he wasn't.
He wasn't.
Oh, no.
No, he wasn't. But that's how the church started interpreting it, is that Jesus is saying, abstain, be celibate.
Jesus is like, I said what I said. He's like, did I stutter? I said what I said.
And in the 1st century, so I'm reading this article by this scholar, and he's kind of unpacking what the reputation of eunuchs was like in the 1st century, and it was anything but celibate. They were known for being quite good sexually with men and women.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Women, especially well-off women, would prefer to have a sexual partner who's a eunuch because it's birth control.
Interesting.
Just because you can't get an erection, and by the way, some men still could get an erection. Yep. But even if you can't, that's not like what that whole framework does. Is it tells us that when people hear or think about sex, they're really thinking just penis and vagina, and sex goes way beyond that.
Right.
Like,
right.
So the fact that you're saying a eunuch is celibate says something about your own awful sex life, that you think of sex as just one thing, right?
Yeah.
So I'm reading this and I'm like, oh my God, Jesus even if Jesus didn't say it, it's said in the gospel. It's put in his, like, he's described saying it. He's affirming a non-binary person who cannot procreate. Yep. So all the people who define marriage around this idea of it needing to be between heteros because it needs to be procreative and all that stuff, like, that's just out the window.
Right.
It's all out the window. If you actually pay attention to what is attributed to Jesus on marriage, Jesus doesn't ever say anything about marriage anywhere. Like, this is about divorce and whether or not it's okay. And that's a whole other conversation. Jesus is not depicted speaking positively of divorce anywhere in the Gospels.
Right.
Just not at all.
Right.
Like, or negatively, like, don't do it. It's amazing. You can't unknow that, right?
Yeah. And that's super interesting. And one thing I've noticed about the Bible is when you split what the Bible says versus the red text that's attributed to Jesus, you get two different. You get two different, right? So one is like, if you hold hands, you're going to die of herpes. Like, don't, unless you're married, and then suddenly it's fine.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And the other one is like, take care of homeless people, take care of your community, don't sell merch in the church, right? Like, treat prostitutes the same way you would treat any other human being. And people are like, No, I'm pretty sure he meant he just didn't like gay people. I'm like 100% sure that's what he meant. And you're like, did you read any of the red words? Do you
Right.
need help? Like, I can read those to you.
Right. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very, and I've met a large group of people that are no longer calling themselves Christians. They are literally just going by what Jesus says. They're just following Jesus's teaching. They're putting away all of the other toxic information they get from the Bible. And they, like, at the moment, they don't really have an identity. They don't say Christian, they don't say, they don't know what to say, but all they know is that they believe that the teaching of Jesus is the correct way to go, and there's just not a term for it. And I just think that's super interesting. And I wonder if that option had been available earlier in my lifetime, how many people I know would have picked that route as opposed to, atheist, agnostic, any other route that they chose. It's super duper interesting. And can you still call yourself agnostic and say, but I really like the ideas that were attributed to Jesus, right?
Of course you can. Yeah.
Because to me, it's like, I've always thought that the Bible was originally written as Aesop's fables. Here's a story, and even though the story is kind of outlandish, here's the lesson we're trying to teach you. And then somewhere along the way, somebody went, nope, it's literal. They meant it. Like there was just, we all came from the same two people. There was a snake talking, there was a whale spitting people on the beach, and I 100% believe it. And the original people were like, hey man, this is just fables, man. He's like, nope, that's what happened. And then whatever, and then everybody believed that guy because he just was really arrogant. If you look at the Bible from, like, especially the stories in the Bible from that perspective, it actually makes a lot more sense.
It does.
Like, okay, I get what they're saying. Tortoise
right.
and the hare, I don't think that happened. I know that's disappointing. I know that's really disappointing. I know that hurts your feelings, but I don't think that actually happened. I don't have any proof that it didn't. So maybe I'm an agnostic when it comes to Aesop's fables. I'm an agnostic. Right. But I feel like you can still take those lessons and be like, that makes sense. Now, there's a lot of lessons that I'm like, that does not make sense.
That
like
really
that's
awful.
still, I don't get it. Job, what was that about? What was the whole Job thing about? That was upsetting. That is not a story that I would want to live by. But I mean, have you ever read a passage from the Bible or a story and thought that, like, hey, I can use this, like, this is useful for me, or I wish I had not read this. What do I do now? Do I apply this to my life? Do I not? Do I leave it behind? I don't know. Like, as you've been at this longer, how do you respond to learning things like that are disappointing or upsetting or violent or just straight up toxic?
Well, it makes it increasingly more difficult to be excited about the Bible. Like, the more that kind of racks up, the more that you kind of file under the column of, wow, this is ancient ideas that we need to replace or we need to stop perpetuating. It does. The more you see of the Bible that way, the harder it is to enjoy it, like you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
And I think my response to your question about that is not going to be very reassuring, because I really don't know what to do with that. Like, it's just, because here I am trying to be a public scholar about the Bible.
Right.
And a lot of what I'm saying is pretty negative. But the reason I'm doing that is because it needs to be said, right?
And it's there. It's there. Like, can we at least agree that's what I didn't make that up.
Exactly. Right. We need to be honest about it. That's what's going on. And so I'm going to keep doing this thing. And I know that there are a lot of people out there who need it to be comforting, who need it to be whatever and all that stuff. And I think the last thing I want to do is take away something that is helpful for people. But I think that there are other places to get comfort or to get insight and wisdom. But it's just that we've not been shown them, or people haven't had the chance to look into alternatives, I guess.
Or when they've looked into alternatives, people have told them, does that match what the Bible says?
Right. Yeah.
So you're saying that
heretic.
God, exactly. Like, so you're saying that you don't want to go with God's word. You want to go with somebody else's word. Ugh, like, okay, good luck. Love the sinner, hate the sin, I guess,
Yeah,
that phrase is, like sends people. Yeah,
totally. Yeah.
And so telling people, especially women, about what the Bible says about marriage seems like a
Mhm.
very, very important part of your work. In fact, earlier you said like you feel like it's some of the most important work you're ever going to do in your lifetime. Is it because it because it's helping them understand that it's unhealthy? Is it helping them understand there are healthy and unhealthy aspects? Like, what is it about letting women and people know what the Bible says about marriage that's that important to you?
It's primarily actually not about women in this case. It's primarily about marriage equality conversations
Mm,
in this
yes.
country and around the
Yes.
world. And regardless of your background, regardless of your religious identity, in political spaces, you will still have people saying some reference to the Bible says what God ordained. That language shows up in political debates about marriage equality, right?
Isn't that weird?
No, no, not at all.
I mean, yeah, no, you're right. It's not. Like,
I mean, I'm not
actually,
sure about that.
right.
That's why it needs to be said. Like, okay, we we kind of have this collective understanding that we think the Bible is important in this conversation. Let me show you all the ways and reasons why it actually should not be. And so
Interesting.
yeah, so, like, let's just be really honest about what it does say, like, let's be honest about those 4
Yeah,
passages that people can say.
yeah.
Let's look at that, Genesis 1:28, Genesis 2:24, Matthew 19:4-6, and Ephesians 5:31 and 32. Let's talk about what those are actually saying. Let's talk about the context. Let's talk about the fact that they're not talking about marriage in the first 2. They're not
Right,
talking
right,
about marriage.
right.
And yet we're using it to define marriage. Like, that is a really fascinating cherry picking, right?
Yes.
And then I look at the other side, which is like all the other things that are going on in the Bible. Like, what examples are being set for people by the matriarchs and the patriarchs, the laws, this concept of adultery? What is that doing to people? And, I just did a video on consent in the Bible. Someone asked me to do consent in the Bible. I'm like, oh, you mean the fact that it doesn't exist?
I was gonna say TLDR, it's not there.
Mhm,
There's
mhm,
nothing, doesn't
totally.
exist.
But then the flip of that is, yeah, men are just taking women and doing whatever the fuck they want over and over and over. And I have had more men talk at me in comments in the last 2 weeks about signing a marriage certificate is your consent. No, I'm not exaggerating.
Pardon me.
Yes, and
Wow.
yeah. So
That's wild.
there was when I was in Tennessee, actually, when I was in Nashville, I remember a woman telling me that 15 years in a row, someone brought forth to the legislature, the state legislature, legislation basically stating that it is possible for a man to rape his wife. And it was knocked down 15 years in a row because she's my wife. I can do whatever I want.
Right. And why am I not surprised?
Right,
Why am I not the
exactly.
least bit surprised?
It was
That's wild.
it was the early aughts before it actually passed, early 2000s.
Wow.
Yes,
Wow.
that's my point, right? Like, we have these
That's
biblical
crazy.
texts that have this example for people, right?
Yes.
And I have people who I think mean well telling me, the fact that she married me is her consent, and then they turn to that passage in 1 Corinthians 7 that talks about don't withhold sex from your partner. And people just use that to say, right? Like, I get it whenever I want it. Like, and you owe it to me. Like,
And what's wild about that too is I I have never had sex with somebody who did not want to. But
okay.
I imagine that is a bad time. Like, that's a bad time, right? Like, wouldn't you rather just even if for purely selfish reasons, wouldn't you rather just be with somebody when they want to do it? Like, if for no other reason, it's just a better time. I don't know, but then I think too deep about it, and I'm like, no, for some people that's probably a better time, which is messed up. Like, some people are
Totally.
just evil and horrible. But that's my question is like, oh, I imagine there's somebody standing there, and he's like, how do I get my wife to have more sex with me? And she's like, I have a list, and he's like, how on earth do I unveil the secrets of how to get my wife to have more? And she's like, I can tell you
Show you.
it, like, right now what's turning me off. And he's like, I will look in this text and I will learn what to do. And she's like, honestly, just like help me out around here, like
Right.
more often.
Yeah.
Like help me with
Right.
these kids that you wanted. Yeah.
Yes.
And he's just like, the mystery. Oh, I know. The Bible has the answers right here in these
Yes.
books. Yeah. And she's just like,
No, honey. But yeah,
it's
but
wild.
it is wild. And also, in all honesty, right, the flip, the element of abuse that is happening, and the violence that is happening in countless marriages, because it is a form of, I don't like saying the words online, but in this space, but RAPE, like it is. That is part of what's happening, this
Right.
control, abuse, dominance piece.
Right. Right.
When a woman, and I'm speaking in hetero terms, not that I think it
Right.
only happens in hetero relationships even, but
Right.
when your partner, no, but I want, like, it's anyway, and so
And then on top of that, you have purity culture. So a lot of people, again, like you said, speaking in hetero terms, a lot of women don't understand what's normal and what's not, because that
yeah,
is the only relationship they've ever been in. That's
experience,
it.
yeah,
Especially the physical relationship, that if they ever learn what's normal, it is often years and years and years and years later. And by then it's like untold damage is done to their ability to ever develop a healthy relationship with anyone in the future. Yeah. But doesn't the Bible also say that if you marry a divorced person, you're committing adultery and should be stoned to death?
Well, it doesn't say it should be stoned to death, but
In my version, it does. In my translation, it says you should be stoned to death.
that's
So, I'm just saying, I think it's interesting that that's a part of the Bible that a lot of people don't remember as they're gallivanting through life, is that you're also not supposed to marry divorced people, which statistically is all of us, is everybody, right? But it's like, no, my wife is supposed to have sex with me, the Bible says, but haven't you been married multiple times? The Bible doesn't say anything about that. It's like,
actually it very much does. Yeah.
it does.
Yeah. And
It does.
that's in that same passage in Matthew 19 that I was just referring to.
Hmm.
Yeah. And the thing that, I am interested in people seeing about that is what's happening in the Bible, whether it's the Hebrew Bible, whether it's the words of Paul or the words of Jesus, right? People are talking about marriage purely on the basis of sex.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Jesus is attributed with saying, if you get divorced and then remarry, you're committing adultery on that first relationship. What's being said there is that men really are claiming women through the act of having sex with her, right? And marking your territory, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
It's all about, like, sex is a thing a man does to women. That's how it's talked about in the Bible. That's how it's talked about in the ancient world, like even beyond Jesus, right? It's that women are passive, men are active. They do a thing to her or to an inferior person. And so what Jesus's words confirm is the Hebrew Bible outlook on relationships, or this relationship we call marriage, so he is affirming this very objectifying way of looking at bodies and sex and women specifically.
Mm-hmm.
He's not saying that divorce is a problem because it tears families apart. No. Right?
Right.
It's not because marriage is a sacred thing. No, it's not that either. It's
Right.
that it's all about sex and wanting to be the first one on the scene.
Yes, like used product. Yeah. Yep. I'll never forget, in Atlanta, I saw a billboard once for a luxury car dealership, and I think it was Jaguar, and there's a woman sitting there at a bar, and it says, you're not her first, but does that really matter? Jaguar. And I was like, whoa. I was like 10 when I saw that, and I was like, whoa. Yeah. And like, that's so much of the narrative that women and people in general are given our whole lives.
Right.
It's our responsibility to make sure that we remain pure. It's also our responsibility to make sure we don't do anything that causes impure thoughts in other people. We don't dress in a way, we don't act in a way, we don't just exist in a way.
Right.
Which, as somebody who's lived in Chicago where it's -14 and I was covered head to toe, still got catcalled. So,
Totally. Right?
And I love how it's natural instinct. We can't help it, until I'm walking my dog, who's a pit bull. And then suddenly it's like, oh, natural instinct doesn't matter anymore. It's so strange. You don't hear a single cat call. But and also I've seen it impact men in a way that's unfortunate too. I was reading just yesterday on Reddit, a dad was like, how do I get my daughter to dress more appropriately? She's 14. She wears shorts that look like underpants. And his main thing was, I'm not trying to be a control freak. People look at her inappropriately. And the main response was, teach her how to defend herself. Teach her how to take care of herself. Don't blame her for what she's wearing being what's making them look at her. Teach her that people will act that way and what to do, basically, which I thought was an interesting response, because usually it's like, oh, just wait till they grow out of it and get them longer pants or something like that. But they were saying, if everywhere she goes, you notice people looking at her like hyenas, don't make her clothing the problem. Make being out with people that behave like that the problem, and how to exist in that world.
Agreed.
Which
I think that,
I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
And so and it's sad because you read this narrative from this dad and it does sound like my daughter dresses like a slut. I wanted to dress different. But then at the bottom, that's when it got kind of emotional, when he was like, I'm not trying to be that guy. I just want her to stay safe. And everybody was like, then keep her safe. Like, teach her how to be safe. And it's like a toss up.
It is because it's the same thing. It's the same, like, women have to be the ones to take self-defense classes, right? Like women are the ones who carry their keys between their fingers. Like, what?
Yeah. One of the wildest conversations I've ever had was with my husband when he was talking about going for a walk at night. And I made some comment like, be careful. Like, be careful out there. And he was like, I'm just going in the neighborhood. And I was like, be careful. And he's like, what's, like, I don't think anybody's gonna like mug me out here. And that's when I was like, oh, you only have to worry about your wallet getting stolen because you're 6'2", you know. Oh, like, and then that's when he realized your world is so much different than my world. His worry is, I'm gonna get mugged because we're in Nashville, which makes sense. My worry is, if all you do is mug me, that is
a good thing.
Right. That is like, take my wallet, go for it. Have the iPhone. That's fine. Yeah. And so we just started talking more about the things that I have to think about versus the things that he has to think about. You know, there's that famous phrase, and I'm not saying at all that sexual assault never happens to men, but there is that famous phrase that says, you know, men worry, women will reject them. Women worry, men will kill them.
Yes.
Whoa. Like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like, totally. Yeah. And so has doing this research impacted at all your own relationships with people? Are you married? Are you not married?
I am not. I don't have.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if that, like, if this kind of research impacted at all the way you view like relationships with people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's probably not great. It's not been helpful for my. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. You look at everybody and you're like, I'm never signing a single one of these marriage certificates for the rest of my life. I see you.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, it is. I mean, in all honesty, it is kind of hard to be a person who's trying to call out the effects of patriarchy in our society and the systemic effects of patriarchy on the way that people think and talk and act. It is hard to be that person because you can't turn that off.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So
have you ever been out with somebody where like something happened, like you mentioned something related to work and it just killed the mood?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Because I
imagine in order to get to that point in a conversation, they have to know what you do or like a little bit about your work, probably.
Right.
Like, you're pretty Googleable, I imagine.
I don't know.
I know that. I Googled you. Okay. Yeah, I do know that. I don't know why I said I imagine. I literally Googled you. Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. It does, it's funny too. Yeah, it does make it hard to at times, like, oh dude, you have no idea what you just stepped on, or whatever, like in my mind. And I'm like, I'm trying to be kind, but you just we're done here.
One of my favorite things is when especially since starting this podcast and like talking to so many different people about their experiences and their religions and their beliefs, is having Vince tell me things he's noticed that he never would have noticed before. Like when we're out, he'll see somebody, he'll be like, is that a fundy? And I look and I'm like, it is. Wow, look at you. Like, you're so good at this. Because he's from the north, he's not from down here. So he's not used to seeing people with, floor length denim dresses and like hair down to their butts and stuff like that. And I'm like, it is. Yeah. Congratulations. 2 points. 2 points for Gryffindor. But and so when they open the door out of interest, when they're like, hey, this is me showing interest in things that you're interested in, that's pretty cool. I don't know if you run into that much.
Well, it's funny because I saw Alexandria, I'm trying to blank on her last name, Fry, I think. She's like, yeah, on a airplane, I will tell you I'm an accountant. Like, you don't want to like just tell people that you're a biblical scholar, because that just opens the door. And
my goodness.
It's like a form of mansplaining. Like, people talk at you about what you're actually like a world renowned expert in. Like, it's just weird.
I don't know. I mean, you could be wrong, right? Like, I mean, I'm just saying you could. But have you read, but I saw this documentary on Netflix, and I'm just saying this is what it said.
Right. But, please read with more awareness of the other texts. Yeah, I actually had someone say that to me this week. I'm like, oh, okay.
Well, when they do the whole like, man, you're really getting defensive about this. It just makes my head want to freaking explode. So if you had to leave us with a takeaway, if you said to anybody listening, man, woman, non-binary, trans people, LGBTQ community, if you had to leave us with one lesson or thought or whatever you would want people to remember about this discussion, what would it be? Other than buy your book, because please buy the book. I've linked the website in the comments where you can go get the book.
Thank you. Gosh, what would I want to leave people with? And
we've got plenty of time, so if there's more than one, if you've got like multiple.
Let's see. Gosh, can you ask a different question?
Yeah. What's your sign? Are you?
I'm a Leo.
Yeah, you're Leo. Yeah, I'm Sagittarius.
I don't know what they mean.
I don't know what that means, but I think it means I'm a bitch based on what men told me. I don't know. Just kidding.
I think, I think one of the things that, if I kind of reflect back on, the classes that I've taught and what would happen the first day of my intro courses to, hey, Pragmatic Crystal, I didn't see you're here, is like, the first day I would say, look, I'm not here to tell you what to think or believe. And I literally would watch people just relax, calm down, because they're always afraid, that this is going to be like some sort of catechism or something, like teaching us what to think and believe. Like, no, actually, I'm inviting you to think for yourself. And that's one of the things I would say that's the work I'm doing. I'm inviting people to think for themselves, and we don't have to agree. Like, at the end of the day, I read this biblical passage or this book or this story or whatever a certain way, and I do have lenses I'm using as I read, and they happen to be about actually, can I read from the end of the book? Do you mind?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, go for it.
It's there's, I have two more books in me. One is called Before Reading Paul, Read This. And the other is,
I love that title.
Thank you. The other is Redefining God, because I think we need to redefine God instead of having a debate about whether you're an atheist or not. Like, when what people, this is my whole, like, I'm like, this is why I don't get in these conversations about labels, because the premise of the label atheist, let's talk about it for a minute. That label means that I do not think God exists. But what is never defined is the God that you're asking about, or the God that you are talking about that exists, right? And what people usually mean by God is found in the Bible.
Right.
And that's, please no, we should all be atheists if that's the case, right? That God.
That should be the title of your next book. We should all be atheists.
I love that, actually.
Dedicated to Byler.
That's right.
Byler University dedication page.
But you know what I mean? So the problem is not whether or not God exists. The problem is the way we're describing God.
Interesting.
Right.
And that's actually, and that's true, because I do ask people a lot. I say, do you consider yourself spiritual, even if you're not a Christian? So many people say, yeah, I believe there's something. I just don't think the biblical God is it.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So let's stop, so I also don't want a label that's a negative, right? Like,
right.
So let me I had to preface what I'm about to read with that little commentary about redefining God. So this is from the very last like page or two. Personally, hold on a second.
If you don't like
Well,
spoilers, everybody log off
yeah,
now.
right. Yeah, right. Spoilers. So while it's interesting to learn about the stories or aspects of scripture that often get overlooked, which is one of the things I do, more important is developing your own way of reading and understanding the Bible. All the insights you've had as you read work together to create a lens. Okay, blah, blah. Okay, personally, I hold my understanding of who God is and is not as my lens in every encounter with scripture, which I've literally never defined for anyone. So it's like, I have a litmus test for scripture and theological claims. Here it is. If a biblical passage or theological doctrine endorses freedom, liberation, love, the fullness of life for all people, or a mature and responsible faith, then it is of God.
Interesting.
Yeah, right. When I see a passage that depicts God as wrathful or as dealing death blows to his supposed enemies, for instance, then that passage does not pass the test. When there are passages that contain belittling words or that endorse arbitrary restrictions of people, I assume those passages were inspired by human desires, not a loving and reconciling God. Most of all, and I actually wouldn't even necessarily use this language anymore, but I still think it's helpful for people. Most of all, I believe in the ability of human beings to make ethical, loving, and moral choices. This is what binds us together. I believe that when a biblical passage does not endorse such choices, then we need to be able to call it out instead of finding a way to uphold it anyway. And then blah, blah. So,
Interesting. Yeah.
so that's
And
what I'm doing. Yeah.
And I feel like that's a great question too. I feel like maybe that's the question I was trying to ask earlier is how do people trust their lens? How do they trust their lens? And how do we make sure in life in general, but
Mhm.
in this particular case in reading the Bible, that we aren't one of those people that say, it was a different time. That's not what he means. The God I believe in wouldn't say this, he would say that. How do we differentiate what we are reading because we want to and it's comfortable and it fits what we want God to say and do versus what it actually says? Do you have any like tips or advice? I love what you said about if it's loving and kind and I would say if at any point it instructs you to harm another person or like infringe on their human rights, things like that, but
Mhm.
how does somebody know they're not just making God into who they want God to be versus who he supposedly is according to the Bible?
Well, I mean, I think in all honesty, that just takes a lot of self-reflection and and therapy.
Yeah.
Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
To be able to
Definitely.
be able to say, this is what's happening. This is what I'm doing. Oh, I didn't realize that. I don't know. I
Yeah.
think,
Self-awareness for sure.
yeah.
Self-aware
And I
because if
think, go ahead.
nope.
Well, so many people are just taught this is what God is. This is, these are the words of God. This is, whatever. And so I think one of the first steps in the whole process then is to trust yourself. And that is why, honestly, that I wrapped up with this whole thing, right? This, as I've talked through passages, I've held up my own lens for you to see how I view scripture. Your lens or litmus test will be your own, and perhaps will be different. But the thing is, I think it's an important thing to be aware of what that is. What is it I think everybody should go to seminary. Like what, you know what I mean? Like everybody should
Please
learn.
no. God.
No, I know. But you know what I mean? Like I think people need to sit with it. There's a process here. It takes some
Yeah.
time to figure out.
Yeah. Yeah. And also I think there's a level of self-awareness. For example, I know exactly, like on a biological level, how I feel when something is not going my way. I know
Okay.
that feeling.
Okay.
So if
Mhm.
I read something and I start feeling that way and I start going, no, 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 that's not what it says. But I feel that feeling where I know that I read what I read and it's not suiting my, like, I know that I'm wrong in these instances oftentimes. You know, when
Mm.
you get like a certain defensiveness, when you know for a fact that what you wanted, whether it's what you're reading, whether it's what you're being told, whether you Googled like the answer to something, isn't what you're being given. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, many people know that about themselves, what it feels like when they can tell something's not going their way, and how to basically practice being better at being wrong about stuff, or being better about being introduced to ideas and truths that may not be what they had in mind. And so I feel like being uncomfortable maybe is a great starting point. If everything you read is going your way, something's wrong.
Mm.
Something, you're either not looking in the right places, or you're lying to yourself about how it's going, I guess. So
Mm.
maybe would you recommend starting by Googling things that they know are probably truly not what they're going to want to hear, but non-biblical topics? Like, oh, what's a common misconception that we hear all the time? What's the true version? Oh, well, that's not nearly as fun. You know, what's the true story behind this urban legend I've heard all the time? Oh, well, that's not as fun as the urban legend. Just constantly introducing yourself to things that aren't what you thought they were going to be, and like working your way up to,
Mm.
now we're going to do it on a
Mm.
scriptural level, because
Mm.
I've
Mhm.
basically practiced being
Mhm.
incorrect and being bummed out by what I'm reading. I don't know if that made any sense.
That did. Yeah, I'm tracking with you on that, and I think I'm better understanding the question you asked before that, m because of this. And yeah, it's an interesting suggestion, right? Practice being disappointed in what you've believed or heard or something
Mm.
give yourself a chance to do that on a less, central or charged topic.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a really interesting suggestion. We should probably come up with a list of those for people.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like,
That would
"Try this
actually
out
be cool.
first." Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. I
that'll make
may do
it
that.
easier for you to tolerate this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and I do people will often jump to, "Well, but the point of the story," or jump to something, like, "Let's move on, let's get to the next thing," and that's a sign that you need to sit with this thing that you're trying to
Right.
get us to move on from. Um, yeah, really lots of important you've got lots of, important questions and things you're thinking about with all of this. Yeah, I just know that it was freeing. It was very freeing for me to be able to ask questions, pursue them, not agree with what the tradition has told me the answers should be. It was very
Not finish
freeing.
school in Texas.
Not finished.
Just like, step
Right?
one, Baylor. Balls in your court.
Yeah, it just was very freeing to not have to find a way to accommodate these texts anymore.
Do you remember the first time you asked a question and it was just welcomed? And you were just like, what the heck? You're supposed to be telling me I'm wrong.
Well, I
Can't you
don't
see I'm a
remember.
woman? Can't you see?
I don't remember the first time, but that was what I was experiencing every day at Vanderbilt, was I was asking the same questions I'd been trying to ask before, and people were like, "Yeah, that's great."
And you're like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You must misunderstood what I ask. You're supporting me. I got a comment down here in the comments. Scott Lloyd's lose some debate rounds. It'll humble you quickly. Scott and I were in debate together.
Oh,
So
were you?
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah. We were
small
in
world.
professional debate for IPDA back in the day. Scott is still a debate coach.
Yes, yeah.
I just argue with people all the time for fun. No, I'm just kidding. No, I don't. No, I don't. People think when you've been in debate, people think you enjoy arguing, and you're like, they used to pay me scholarship money to argue. I don't do it for free. I know exactly how much it's worth to the dollar amount. Why would I do it for free? Well, Dr. Jennifer Bird, this has been a really fantastic conversation.
Oh,
I've really
good.
enjoyed talking to you. I'm going to write down more questions that I thought of, and I'm going to send your way. And if you ever want to do a part 2, I would love to have you back for a part 2. I'm also going to read through your books and see if maybe I have questions about that. Same with the audience. If you happen to get the book, or if you've read the book and you have questions or thoughts about this interview, I see tons of people have been commenting in the actual comment section here on YouTube. But if you're listening to this on an audio platform, my email is in the description box of every platform that this interview will be available on. So send me your questions, send me your comments, send me the things that you liked, send me the critiques, whatever you got. We'd love to hear from you. And I will make sure that Dr. Bird gets an opportunity to see what it is you're asking or talking about or what you want to know. And maybe we'll do like a part 2 or something. Maybe we'll have enough content. And then everybody writes in, they're like, Baylor's fine, actually. It's a great place to be. Thank you. So just FYI, I wonder how many people are going to get a Baylor ad for this on YouTube.
Oh, that's
running
hilarious.
before this.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Bird, this has been wonderful. And I really appreciated your time and your expertise. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And so what we're going to do now is I'm going to run a couple of little trailers. And then after that, we're going to have a live panel, which Dr. Bird, if you're available, you're welcome to stay as part of this panel to ask or be a part of. But for anybody watching, we're going to have a panel deconstructing into a better person and people's experiences deconstructing and what they felt changed for the better as they were going through the deconstruction process. And just, we've got some creators that are going to join us here in a couple minutes to just give their thoughts and perspective. But yeah, thank you, Dr. Bird. It was really nice to see you again.
Indeed. Thanks for having me, Sydney. This was great.
Indeed. Now, I just realized now, I don't think I end the stream. I think I keep the stream going, and now I'm just going to play some trailers. So if you have to hang up, Dr. Bird, I understand.
Yes,
and I will email you.
Yes.
Okay. Then you can hang up, and I'm going to play some trailers.
Okay.
I did not rehearse this.
That's okay.
I'm so sorry.
All right. Thank you.
See you later.
I just felt like I could tell, like they're being honest enough to where it gets by.
Yes.
But they still want to maintain like their image or like the status that they have.
Yes.
Because and
then they're going to leave here, and then they're going to scream at a barista for not having peppermint mochas anymore because it's not like, December.
It's not worth it. Like, what are you doing, you know?
In my childhood, I grew up with a mother who, she was religious, then she wasn't. She was religious, then she wasn't. What we call backslidden, right? And then I'd go visit my dad, who was never religious. So I would be like 9, 10, 11 when I go visit for Christmas. And I'd be taken to drug parties. Like I was I grew up in the 70s. So I'd see the adults doing hash and smoking pot and drunk and just, so I was like, I thought everything. And I was never tempted to do anything. I never smoked. I never did drugs. I never drank, nothing. I didn't even start drinking wine till I was like 37 or 38 years old.
Wow.
I just never had the desire. I never had the desire.
That's impressive.
But yeah. And so my mom's walk with the Lord was so wishy-washy. I just never saw a real strong commitment with anyone.
Well, that's why you're an atheist.
Yeah.
You just never had. That's what people
never really knew God. All right. So I told most of our guys, I did not rehearse this. This is live, raw. You're getting the real deal. I told the panelists to log on at 5:15. It is currently 5:10. I've got one panelist. Granny, do you mind if I bring you on a little bit early? I know you're in the back room. I'm glad you said no, because I realized I just asked you in front of everybody, so no pressure. But we do have panelists that are joining us, and anybody who's watching who's a presenter in Skeptic University and got the email with all the links, you are welcome to hop in on this panel as well and join us at any point in the evening that you're free. You can log on as somebody who wants to answer. You can log in as somebody who has questions, but I'm going to bring on my friend Godless Granny, and let's see here. There we go. Awesome. Thank you so much, Granny. I appreciate you.
You are most welcome.
How are you doing? What's going on? What's new?
Well, the big thing here is ICE.
Yes, same.
Everything has been closed. Everything was closed for the entire week last week. Schools, the government, a number of businesses, because the roads have been impassable.
Yes.
1 inch of snow and ice can cripple the whole city because we have no ice trucks. We have no
Same.
snow plows.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I spent an entire week where I did not leave my house. I finally left the house for the first time on Saturday. Today, the schools were still closed.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Because that's like, what is that, like 7 straight days or 8 straight school days, not even including the weekend?
Well, last Monday was Martin Luther King Jr.
That's right.
Day. So they missed
right.
five straight days of school.
Wow, that's wild. And you know, the funny thing is I moved away from Chicago because of this weather, and I just moved into it less prepared now. So I could have stayed and at least had clear sidewalks and clear roads. But thank you for joining our so far 1-person panel. I really appreciate it.
I think everyone's going to be late because originally it was said that this was started at 5:30, and I saw that it said 5:15, and so I came early.
That is my bad. And I
no,
will.
No worries. So if we have to chat until 5:30 till everyone else gets here, that's fine with me.
And I'll post in the Facebook. This is live, ladies and gentlemen. You paid for live, and by that I mean it's free. But you paid for live, and this is what you get when it's free: is you get unfiltered. So let's see. So I'm literally just gonna write in the Facebook chat right now. So I started the panel early on accident. Oops. Oops. If you want to hop on now, you can. If anybody in the chat who's watching right now, any of the live viewers want to ask us questions about the deconstruction process, about thoughts we had, experiences we had, what kicked it off. Somebody said, your presence is our presence.
Yeah, I saw that.
100%.
That was so sweet, Logan.
Thank you. And then somebody else said, you two are perfect. And that is my mom. I'm just kidding. That's not my mom. She's not in the chat. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Granny, if you don't mind. Oh, and we have somebody. I don't know if he's officially on. I don't want to announce if people are on in case they're just practicing. So tell me a little bit about your process while you were deconstructing. Was there anything that you wished you had known earlier, or anything that you were surprised maybe it wasn't as hard, or maybe it was a lot harder than you thought?
For me, the actual deconstruction was almost instantaneous. And so although when I first told the story, I've told the story of how it was instantaneous. And when I've listened to other people's stories and what went into their process, I realized there actually was a process, but I didn't realize it was going on until the very end.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you felt like there was a definitive end to your deconstruction process?
Oh yeah, there is no question. There was a light bulb moment when I just realized, oh my God, none of this is true.
Yeah. And your story is one of the most fascinating ones I've ever heard. If you don't mind giving us like a little kind of rundown on what happened exactly that started that literally dropped that bombshell.
Okay. First, I was raised agnostic. My parents were Catholic when I was very young, but they left the Catholic Church when I was 7. And so I was pretty much raised agnostic. But at 16, there was a guy in my English class that forced me to listen to him tell about the gospel. And there was one thing that he said that to me made me think that he had some kind of insight, that he had some kind of message from God about me because I didn't think he could know this about me if he hadn't been told by a God. I didn't realize until much later that this is the hook that they use with everybody.
Interesting. So he was basically like, he used the same tactic that fortune tellers use when they're
Right,
like,
right,
interesting.
exactly.
It's like, oh, he was
Basically-
literally just paying attention to me when I spoke.
Right. And so I believed what he said, hook, line, and sinker, converted, dedicated my life to this for the next 42 years. And I was so in. I mean, I was
That's
in church every
interesting.
time the doors were open. We tithed or more. I was involved in, all the activities. This was my life.
Yeah.
The first crack, and it really wasn't even a crack at all. It was really, I didn't see it that way, was in 1984 when our first child was stillborn. And when
Mm,
that happened, I started questioning my faith, but I came out on the other side just as strong as I had been before. The only difference was that I identified very clearly what the foundation of my faith was. And that foundation was biblical inerrancy. As long
wow.
as the Bible is true, I will believe this regardless of how I feel. And that dedication led me to a horrible, horrible result because it meant that I followed this blindly, regardless of how I felt. And what it did to the relationship between my husband and me was absolutely atrocious.
Right.
Because I did whatever he said, regardless of how I felt about it.
Right. And that's so unhealthy.
Yeah. And that's when, and to try to convince myself that this was the right thing to do, I tried to convince myself that I am not a person.
Whoa.
I did. I would get up in the morning and I would tell myself, I am not a person. I have no thoughts. I have no feelings. I am here to serve my husband and to serve my God, and that is it.
That's so reminiscent of what Dr. Bird was just talking about. How it's
Mhm,
like you're an item, you're an object, you're a belonging, that's your service. And did
mhm.
that why do you think that seemed like a better option than just being honest about how you felt? Did you think God would be upset about your honesty, or was it more just your personal feelings?
I don't think I could have lived with it.
Interesting.
Um, if I was honest about how I felt, because it was driving me mad.
I bet.
Um, um, the biggest problem was sex
Yeah.
because I gave him whatever he wanted, whether I wanted it or not. And if I
Yes.
told him I didn't want something and he wanted it anyway, I gave in every time.
Wow.
And that was driving me nuts.
That would make somebody crazy. I can't even imagine. And I feel
Uh-huh.
like you are literally the person that we were speaking to a moment ago, just in the last interview. That's the person who says it's my job, my duty to do these things, to just keep my head down and just do it. Wow. That's
Mhm,
so interesting. That's
mhm.
it's such a journey. It's such an upsetting one, but I'm so glad you're on the other side. And so what do you think, in hindsight, what do you think it was that made you flip the switch to religion so
Oh,
fast and away so fast? Like,
okay. What flipped me to, it actually took me longer to flip to. It took me a few weeks. But what flipped me too was the guy that was sharing with me told me that there was a hole in my heart, that I was missing something in my life, and that he had it, and he could fill this void in my life if I just believed and trusted in his God. And so I did.
wild, wild. Well, we are so glad you're out on the other side, Granny, and I'm so glad that you are sharing what you've learned with people, and you're so public about your message. I think you just have a wonderful platform, and we are grateful for it. The number of people in the comments just singing your praises are just fantastic.
Mm.
Dr. Kip, Chad Harris, how's it going? Welcome to the stream. Thank you for joining me in my too early stream. I tried, guys. I tried my hardest. I tried to be organized.
It's good to be here, absolutely. And hey, always fun to hop in with you. So good to see y'all.
Did you plan your polo shirt to match your background that well on purpose?
I absolutely did not. I literally just walked in from work, so it just worked out.
It looks great. Looks great. And Dr. Kip, how are you doing?
Doing good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. We're talking about the deconstruction process. If you've already finished it, if you feel like you're in the middle of it, if you feel like you're just beginning, what you feel like is different or better since having begun, anything at all related to deconstruction. And I actually had somebody post a question here that anybody can answer from the group if you'd like. Carrie asked, what outside of faith related things have you begun seeing religious ideologies imposed on since leaving the faith?
Can I see the question again?
Yep. I'll just leave it up. There you go.
That's good.
Yeah, everything. But I'll go into more detail unless anybody else wants to go. Granny, were you going to say something?
I'll go first. Sure. For the biggest thing is the LGBTQ community.
Yes.
And even when I was a believer, I was starting to see that, it does not make sense to try to get unbelievers to live as if they are believers. But that's exactly what believers want. They want unbelievers to live as if they were believers.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I feel like you can see it in complicated things like the government where it shouldn't be, but you can also see it where I've noticed it the most and been the most surprised is just everyday conversation. People say, oh, thank God you're okay. Or, oh, I'll pray for you. Like at work, you get offered religious holidays that only apply to Christianity. You get bonuses for holidays that only apply to Christianity. And it's so prevalent, especially in places here like Tennessee, where there's 2 different license plates. Some say in God we trust, some don't. And the ones that don't are in a different order so that anybody who looks at your license plate from a distance knows that it doesn't say in God we trust. It's on the money. It's everywhere. And that's just allowed. It's just allowed. The Pledge of Allegiance has it in there. Dr. Kip, I saw you nodding. Do you have thoughts?
I was going to say full disclosure. I still say thank God all the time.
I do too.
And I find myself still verbalizing. I guess talking in my head. I'm talking to myself. I recognize that I'm talking to myself now, but it's the exact same thing as when I used to say silent prayers to God. But I think this just brought to mind something that I just heard this morning in a terrible podcast that I
told you not to listen to my podcast before you came on here. I don't like.
No, I listen to the terrible podcast so others don't have to. But the speaker in one said that it's, and this is almost a direct quote, I'm paraphrasing lightly, it's a sin to vote Democrat because it's a sin to steal. And that's apparently what the Democrats are doing through their woke socialist agenda.
We did steal the election. Like now that we're far enough in, I can admit we did. We did. Now that it's already over.
And maybe I have the benefit of not just the hindsight post deconstruction, but the hindsight or the separation of the distance from living on the other side of the border. But the level to which I think religion is connected to government and to politics.
Yes.
And to those sorts of social ideologies is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Especially from this side of
well, especially in a country that like prides itself on separation of church and state. That's what cracks me up. Like, why do we even still bother? Like, why don't we just admit that that's not the case anymore? Right? Unless they just mean separation of everybody else's church except the correct one. That's what I think that means. It's like, no, separation of Islam.
But in the ideology I grew up with, with the strong Christian nationalist, like undercurrent, the Joshua generation type stuff, that was what we were taught from a very early age. We were taught that separation of church and state was never actually in any of our founding documents. It was in a random letter by Thomas Jefferson. He really didn't mean it. What he meant was denominations couldn't take over, like Christian denominations couldn't take over, the U.S., but they fully intended Christianity to be the default, you guys. That's what we were taught growing up. It came from people like David Barton and Michael Ferris and Bill Gothard himself, frankly. And now we're starting to see that reach into mainstream evangelical churches to where, they no longer consider a separation of church and state to be a value, that they promote. They consider it to be, just something that, they can reword and reinterpret for their own means, much like they do in the Bible.
The separation of Methodists and state, the separation of Catholics and state, not the separation of Baptists, though. We know what's up. We know how things work. It also, something interesting is, as I've noticed, people are talking about post deconstruction and the end of their deconstruction. I've heard a lot of people who are kind of new to agnosticism and atheism unsure of how basically to know when they're done, how to know when that process is over. In your personal opinions, what was it for you that told you, I'm done, I'm on the other side, that world is pre, this is post? Just out of curiosity.
Let you know when I get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like deconstruction to me is an ongoing process. Like, especially if you've been raised like I was, to be so into it when it was your entire world growing up. Like, even, now that I'm an atheist and now that I have left, religion behind, even to this day, I still keep asking myself, what else was I wrong about? And what else do I continue to be wrong about? I'm not a perfect person. I still hold biases. I still hold, thoughts and beliefs that don't coincide with reality. And I hope every day, to know better and do better. But I don't ever foresee it for me personally, being here is a line where I have reached, deconstruction. But that's just me personally. I'd be curious to hear what everybody else says.
You just wake up one day and you're like, this is it. I've done it. I've reached enlightenment. And it's pretty boring, to be honest. It's pretty similar. By the way, Dr. Kip, I am so sorry earlier that I said Deuteronomy is boring. That was literally just the only book of the Bible whose name I could remember in that moment. And I felt like I disrespected you. So if you don't show up tomorrow, that's my fault.
No, I have all the more reason. What's that?
Numbers is boring.
It's true. Literally, the name is Numbers. I should have said that one.
Yeah.
Hot take, Song of Solomon's boring. There, I said it.
Just show up tomorrow.
Yeah, you got to teach me a lesson. It's interesting and you'll like it.
It's incoming. You damn right.
Yeah. Well, kind of towards what we were talking about a minute ago, I always think I'm done with deconstruction, and then something else comes up, and I'm like, God damn it! One more thing that is not related to religion in any way that I realize I do, or I say, or I think based on religious principles, and I just get like mad all over again, even though I swear I'm through with my angry atheist face. Does anybody else have that? It's similar to, I guess, what the question was asking. Is there ever anything in your life where you're like, I did not think that had anything to do with religion, and yet here we are? Thoughts? I can start. Oh no, yeah. If you've got an answer.
I mean, you're talking about like personally, or just what we like experience and witness as society, or what have you?
In general, yeah, in general.
Well, what I was going to say about the things imposed, just in general since leaving the faith, I've noticed like the entertainment industry seems to have been kind of pandering a bit more toward religiosity than usual. So when I grew up, of course, like anything involving like movies or mainstream entertainment was sincerely frowned upon. But now we see things like clean flicks or pure flicks rather, and other religious movies and such, gaining mainstream success because they can be made with such a low budget, and they can convince entire churches to buy out movie theaters and send their people there, right? Yeah. So I've noticed like yeah, exactly.
That name sounds dirtier than just Netflix or like any of the porn sites, like Pure Flix. Something like the name makes me be like, that's the opposite of pure. It sounds like that's weird.
I mean, it is run by David A.R. White, and you know that guy's a freak. But yeah, I said hi, guys. But yeah, it's I have noticed like there seems to be a little bit more. I guess I would say, and of course, as a child of the '80s and '90s and everything, there. I did grow up with some. I didn't grow up with it, but I later found out, wow, there was some really violent, nasty movies when I was growing up, and they're awesome. But now I have seen like more of a trend toward, if not outright Christian movies, there are movies that are made for a primarily evangelical Christian audience and everything that can be disguised as well. I think Sound of Freedom probably is a great example of that. Like that was one of those things like, oh, you should go see it because it's totally about protecting the kids, and then it ends up being a
pizza
basically
parlor?
a movie about pretty much
A pizza parlor, Hillary Clinton. I knew it.
One thing that really surprised me as being religious that I didn't expect is the anti-vaxxers.
Oh yeah.
I have just been
Yes.
absolutely shocked at how strong the anti-vaxxers are getting, to the point where Candace, what's her name, now has a
Cameron
whole
Burr?
show. What?
Cameron Burr.
No,
Candace
Candace, on the Daily Wire.
Oh,
I
Yes,
can't
I-
remember her
Candace
last name.
Owen?
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Yes, Candace Owen. She has a whole show just dedicated to being anti-vax. And
When that's your whole personality, man.
yeah, and there isn't even anything in the Bible, thou shalt not be vaccinated.
Listen, Candace Owens, and I don't care if she's listening to this. She's not, but I'm just going to pretend like she is. Like, I have haters. I don't think she cares about the Bible. That is not a lady who cares about the Bible. That is a lady who will do anything for views. Tommy Lahren does not care about the Bible. I said it. I'm going to pretend like they're coming for me, even though they're not. Yeah, I've always had a sneaking suspicion that people who were megachurch pastors or once you reach the organization to a certain level, it wouldn't surprise me at all that you're actually not even a Christian, that you're just straight up an atheist who has recognized a business that they can be in. Like Joel Osteen, I don't think that guy's Christian. I don't think he believes in God. I think he just loves counting money and baring his teeth in way too toothy of smiles, which he really needs to get a handle on that. Yeah, most of those people, like, yeah, Benny Hinn, don't think that guy's actually a Christian at all. I think they just recognized a business scheme that works and has worked just since, at least the 70s, if not earlier than that, when they started putting evangelists on TV. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if Candace is actually just doesn't even believe any of the far right stuff she preaches. She just recognizes how to make good business. And it's like, hey, that's a paycheck. That was a weird rant to go on, guys. I'm sorry.
No,
you're right.
That's cool.
That's right.
I think
Damn right.
I think I noticed the anti-vax, the relationship between the anti-vax movement and Christianity, I think really hit its stride with COVID.
Yes.
And this is probably something that surprised me, and it took me some time to sort of unpack really what was going on. When you saw pastors, church leaders like John MacArthur. There was another church pastor up in my neck of the woods here, who was actually arrested and fined for ignoring government mandates for assembly and when we were all in lockdown and nobody was allowed to go to church. It felt like it was more about that. I think this idea, and this is the way MacArthur kind of couched it too, was it is a mandate. We are duty bound as Christians to assemble, to gather, to get together, and your infringing on, your infringement on our rights to do so is causing this violation of a divine command, which I thought was, an interesting workaround for something that I also think has its roots just in a deep distrust of science, to start with. In fact, I think, I'll just say this. I recently heard another evangelical leader, Doug Wilson, say that he's not he's not anti-vaccination. He's just opposed to this vaccination.
Okay.
And for reasons, again, connected to, the rules that accompanied the pandemic when they were instituted, and then what appears to some people to be this, I don't know where this comes from, but the fact that the COVID vaccine was developed and distributed so quickly, has just heightened what I think is a suspicion and a distrust of science in the first place.
Right. Well, the interesting thing about that is there's actually evidence that they were working on similar vaccines for a long time. A good friend of mine develops vaccines. That's literally her job. And so she already had that job when COVID hit. So I would understand that thought process if vaccines did not exist and then they invented vaccines and then they tried to peddle it to. But vaccines have been people's full-time job since decades at least, if not longer than that, if you count some of the like early immunization. Right. And so my question is, why in no narrative that I've heard, correct me in the comments, folks, I know there are some religious people in the comments, why did God not invent the vaccine? Why is that not the answer to why it was able to be developed so quickly? When people buy houses, they're like, God helped me find this house. That's why I found this house. Even though you went on Zillow, you typed in your budget, you typed in the zip code that you were looking for, you narrowed it down to the ones you like, but that's okay. Like, you can credit whoever you want, I guess. So
Sydney,
why is it?
God gave you the brain to develop the vaccine.
That's true. And again, that's like, to me, why was that never? It's kind of like when people say, why didn't God invent animals and then those animals evolved, right? Like some Christians are like, hey, you can be pro-evolution. You just believe that God invented the first version and then they changed. Why is the narrative so infrequently that that's why we were able to come up with this vaccine? Because God invented scientists, or he blessed them with the ability to invent these vaccines. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Dr. Kip, when you said it's not about the science. It's about what that stands for. It's about the control. It's about the rule. It's about the government. If somebody else had been peddling the vaccine, it probably wouldn't be as big of a problem. But because it was such a tumultuous time politically in this country, and you can talk to people from other countries, they're like, COVID was never a political thing in our country. Everybody agreed that it was a problem and that people were dying, regardless of what else we agreed on. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that's what it was about. Absolutely.
But
Well, and
one
also,
thing
when you
one thing that's kind of confusing is Trump was president. The
That is confusing, you're right.
evangelicals had their person in power, and even though we had the churches being shut down, it was their own president that was in charge of it all.
Yep.
And what you were saying, Dr. Kip, too, I think was very significant. When you quoted Doug Wilson, we're talking about someone who has his own religious empire in rural Idaho as well, which, is, I mean, it kind of plays to this whole idea of Christians who, especially mainstream evangelical Christians and the ultra conservative ones, who have had this idea that, they have to face persecution for their faith to be legit. And even though Christianity is the default in the country right now, basically here in the States, they still want to take anything that could be even looked at as persecution and amplify it so much to make it a cause that they could rally behind. They were told in the Bible that they would face persecution. When that doesn't come, they will absolutely look for it, is my belief. I mean, that was what we were raised with, growing up. When I was in homeschooling, we were always taught that, the government's going to show up at any minute, no matter who was in power. They'd be like, oh, the government's going to show up and like force you to go to government schools and stuff and take you out of the family because we're homeschooling you. How many kids homeschool nowadays? Like it's never been that way. The cases where that has happened have been documented as like heavily abusive situations. So it's just this narrative that they made up in their own minds to keep control over the folks who have to stay afraid in order to promote these little empires they have.
Yes. And I feel like we all know that person whose entire personality is normalize this thing, even though it's not really an abnormal thing. But we think to ourselves, like, what are they going to do when that is normal? Like, what's their next thing going to be? They're going to have to develop a whole new personality. I feel like that's very similar to the victim narrative, where it's like, I was promised persecution. Hey, what? Like, wait a second. I was told that if I came here, I would be persecuted. And frankly, I've been treated well and I'm upset. I need, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't come here for my people to be ruling. I came here for my people to be ruling, but also pretend they're not. That's what I came here for. I came here to be told in a way that I can record on my cell phone at Starbucks that I'm not important. Like low level persecution. Like, don't actually take my rights. Like, just give me a good sound bite so I can go viral on TikTok. That's what I came here for.
Like giving me a red cup.
God damn it. The war on Christmas is ending. I will end the war on Christmas. It's not a joking matter, people. Yeah, I think that's also something interesting that you pointed out there is the need for victimization, not the actual need to salvage what they know is not in danger. And it's safe too, right? It's safe when you claim being a Christian is what makes you a victim, because you're allowed to do anything you want here. And all you have to do is say, well, I met an atheist once, and like invent a scenario or whatever, look at whatever fake news websites you look at and find a headline that suits what you're looking for. And it's safe. It's like being the person with hot takes on Facebook when everybody agrees with you. It's a very safe place to have hot takes, right? And so it's easy to say, oh, I'm a Christian and I'm persecuted every day because of my love for Jesus. But you know what? I'm going to keep loving Jesus no matter what. Because one, there's like, Jesus is not going to be like, Terry, that never happened. Like, sorry, I'm just like calling in really quick like that. Nobody's going to call your bluff on that. And if they do, guess what? That's exactly what you were talking about. That person who calls your bluff, that is the person in the scenario that you invented. See, told you. They don't let me talk about Jesus here. It's like, no, man, we just want you to not stand on the tables. It's like, they don't want me to stand on the tables.
Persecution complex.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's a man on the corner by my house. I've lived here for almost 3 years, and every single day, without fail, he has stood there with one of those big, like, God is coming, the end is near, yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. And that is a safe opinion to have because nobody is threatened by that guy, right? Like, I don't even think Christians look at that guy and go, oh, no, he's right. I think they think he's crazy, which is like, okay, well, think about that for like, okay, so we agree. But anyway, but if anything ever happened to that guy, imagine the headline that would be. You see what I'm saying? Like, oh, golden. We can all share the story in Tennessee about how the guy got his ass kicked on the corner because he was carrying a sign when really he was probably being an a-hole or said something he shouldn't have said. And then he got his ass kicked and he just happened to be holding a poster. I don't know. He seems like a nice guy. I've never talked to him. A lot of people have never talked to him. Actually, nobody's ever speaking to him when I see him. But yeah, there's like a safety in claiming that as your victim identity because you don't have to prove it. The whole thing about religion is faith, not proof. You don't have to prove anything. And people who ask you to prove it clearly aren't Christians. So I'm not even going to waste my time, right?
And we have this underlying idea that belief is in and of itself a virtue. as well.
Yeah.
You know, like,
Yes.
yeah, like we were saying with the the anti-vax nonsense. You know, people be like, you can show them evidence all day. Like, no, actually, this is what's happening. Like, well, I don't. Like, I actually approached my mom about this. Right during the heat of COVID, I was like, you need to be careful. I'm like, you're in danger. And she goes, well, I'm still allowed to believe what I want to about this virus. And I'm like, see, that's the problem though. Like, the fact that you believe it doesn't, not only does it make it right, but it doesn't make you any better. Like, why do we hold belief in such a high regard,
Right.
Do you believe it because it's true, or do you believe it because you want it to be true?
Exactly.
Right. And also, when people say things like that, I feel like they're actually telling on themselves that they know it's not true.
Mhm.
Like, they don't say, I'm allowed to believe the truth. This is the truth. They're saying, I'm allowed to believe what I want. And you're like, it reminds me of that meme where Arthur's sister is like, this doesn't hurt me because I can't read. Right. And it says like, keep out or whatever. It's such an odd hill to die on. It seems
Literally.
exhausting. Literally. It seems, and we've all heard that tale, I feel like, where it's like the man's laying on the street and somebody comes up and they're like, do you want some water? He says, no. Okay. Do you want to ride? No. Okay. And then he dies and he's like, Jesus, why didn't you save me? And Jesus is like, I sent a bunch of people to save you. That's the vaccine. Like, that's the vaccine. Like, you die on this hill. You're like, no, I will do everything in my power to ruin this narrative. And then God's like, my brother in Christ, I put people on TV. I literally killed people to show you how serious this was, and you just did the opposite. Do you understand? Right? I like to think that God is a very exhausted, sarcastic person. Because even if he's, even if he's a young Earth God, he's still been doing it for 6,000 years, and that's a long time. That's a long time to do anything, to just be fighting, right? Sometimes I wonder if we're the project that he stopped paying attention to after it went awry and he started the new one, right? If he's just like, oof, this is a mess, but I can't kill them. I could.
If God was real, he would have smashed Noah's boat.
Yeah. Actually, that was a bad idea too.
Right, exactly.
That's interesting. And then also it's like, or are we God's experiment? Which means he likes science. And science experiments. So you should believe in science. I don't know.
But that would mean God isn't omniscient.
Would that be better if he wasn't omniscient? I think.
I actually, towards the end of my my own Christian journey, while I was still a believer and a confessing Christian, I was, and this is sort of an open theistic idea too, but I found it much more, I guess, comforting, much more compatible with reality, that if there was a God who did exist, that he didn't know everything, and he couldn't control everything, and that he was trying his best and not always getting it right. I mean, that's certainly the God of the Bible,
right?
It's trial and error and having temper tantrums and recouping your plans and going back to the drawing board, and this is the God of Israel. So
yeah. I love the idea of going back to the drawing board. I don't love everything you made before burning for eternity. I feel like there's an alternative. Like, I feel like you could just wipe them off the map, start over, right? That's where I have an issue. But yeah, I absolutely see what you're saying. Yeah.
I one of the things I like to bring up, when I'm having these discussions with Christians is, especially the ones who are heavily into the end times. I'm like, well, if you look throughout the Bible, like, how many times does God say, okay, this is going to happen, and then everything's going to be good from now on? Like, oh, okay, I'm going to flood the earth and everything's going to be good. Oh, I'll give you this land. Everything's going to be good. I'll bring you back to this land. Everything's going to be good. And, Jesus is going to come. Everything's going to be good. Here comes the king. Actually, in the future, a long time from now, or maybe now, who knows? Things are going to be good. I'm like, what makes you think that even if you're right about the end times, that things are just going to continue to be good after that? Because it hasn't happened every other time this has happened.
Right. It's like, are we, somebody's just like, sir, I have a question. Are we allowed to ask you for proof, or are we still not doing the whole proof thing? We're not. Okay. We're not doing the whole proof thing. Got it. Because you're right. That's, what is it? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
That's actually not the definition of insanity, but yeah, that's the meme definition of insanity.
Let's see.
And we'll go.
I'm gonna actually now.
We'll
I'm
go
curious.
with
I'm actually gonna go with like the actual definition. Let's see.
that.
Definition of insanity is Googling.
There's a legal definition
So-
and there's a medical definition, and they're quite different.
I
Interesting.
believe that.
Because I want to do facts and evidence on this channel. Let's see. So,
I believe the one you mentioned, Sydney, was actually invented by Alcoholics Anonymous.
fuck. See what I mean? They're everywhere, man. Religion's just
Yeah.
get in there. Religious people. Jeez. So Oxford Dictionary says it's a noun, the state of being seriously mentally ill or madness, extreme foolishness, or irrationality. There's nothing about doing the same thing over and over again, you guys.
Nope.
I've been
And the
lied
legal
to.
definition of insanity is not being able to appreciate the consequences of your actions or not being able to participate in your own defense.
Oh, interesting. Not being able to participate in your own defense. That's an interesting one, which, I mean, makes sense because people plead insanity all the time.
Mhm.
Interesting. Huh. The more you know.
So speaking of things, you always continue to deconstruct.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a prime example of what I was talking about. Here, this whole time, I'd never realized I'd never fact checked that definition, and then Dr. Kip's like, actually,
Deconstruction.
One
I thought it was done.
one area from my former Christian beliefs that I'm still kind of stuck in and still deconstructing from is black and white thinking. I'm still
Yes.
having a hard time getting away from black and white thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Gray areas are one of the biggest differences, I feel like, in life pre-post deconstruction. Anybody else have things that have changed immensely for the better or not, or linearly since deconstructing?
Things that have changed for the better.
Biggest thing that changed for the better for me was being able to take the blinders off.
Yeah.
Being able to read anything I want to read and learn anything I want to learn about, and not having to limit myself to only reading authors who are believers.
Yes. Yeah. I would also say what I was told being a good person was when I was religious versus being a good person now is a totally different experience. I'm embarrassed by a lot of the things I used to do that I was told made me a really good person back then. Like, oh, that is so great. That's so righteous. That behavior is correct. And now I look back and I was just a pick-me for like 25 years. I was literally just a pick-me who judged people for so long. And even though the sometimes trying to do the best thing doesn't always pay out, right? Like, what's that phrase they say where basically like sometimes trying to do the good thing ends up making things worse. At least where it comes from now is a much more genuine place, and I'm a lot more proud of the person that I am now that I was then. I'm not perfect, learn all the time. I'm wrong 90% of the time, but it's the friends we make along the way.
And along the same lines too, for me, the best thing I've let go of is trying to make every single thing in my life a narrative. Like, we as human beings, I believe, have this preset idea that, everything has to have like a big story arc in our lives and everything. And, if you do these things will always work out, and everything's on a preset course and all that, and you best line up with it. And the fact that there really isn't one, and there isn't a rhyme or reason to like, anything that happens as far as like a narrative goes, that to me was so freeing, and corollary to the idea that you're now free to make your own,
Yes.
and
yes.
So you're not always looking for God's will. You can actually set, okay, these are the goals for my life. This is what I want to accomplish with the full knowledge. Hey, I may never get there, but it's something I'm going to strive to.
Right. And you did it on your own, and you did it with your own free will, as opposed to following something that you thought you were supposed to follow. Absolutely. Somebody had a really good question here. What have you enjoyed discovering most about yourself since leaving faiths? Dr. Kip, what faith were you raised in? What was your denomination?
So I was raised an evangelical Christian
Okay, I
in
thought we had
a
talked about that.
fairly conservative Baptist church. I had stepped quite a ways away from that in my early adulthood, and I think I've told people that I probably spent most of my adult life as a pretty liberal, pretty progressive kind of Christian.
Mm.
And a lot of that is reactionary against Christian apologists who insist that, in particular, within my field of biblical scholarship, all those biblical scholars who deconstruct or and outright deconvert just do so because they're lashing out against these fundamentalist principles that were ingrained in them from an early childhood, and I just don't think that's true. I mean, I think the reason it happens is because the Bible is just a heavily problematic book, especially if you're going to sit down and read it as a person who doesn't understand it.
Right.
Where it came from and what it's about, and if you're going to read it through the lens of what it looks like on the face of it, or through the lens of what churches are telling you it is, then it's a problem. So I was going to say things I've discovered about myself are that I do quite enjoy sleeping in on Sunday mornings.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and having my Wednesday nights free. But the biggest one is, I mean, honestly, so my life, I don't think my life changed an iota, except for maybe this one thing, that suddenly I was no longer racked with constant guilt. And really, it's it's so much better, and it's so much more freeing living a life where you don't feel like you're beholden to ideas. I can be myself and the person that I want to be, and that my family needs me to be. And that's enough, right? I'm gonna say it. Thank God, that's enough.
Thank God. That should be a lecture title. Thank God, that's enough. But also, what's interesting is I feel the exact same way, and I've definitely heard that the reason you don't feel that guilt is because you no longer have God telling you not to do all that bad stuff. It's like, oh, so you can just do whatever you want without guilt anymore? Is that what you're saying? And you're like, yes, but I don't smoke crack the way that the church tries to make you think everybody does when they go atheist. So you don't go, I didn't go on a sex bender and I didn't smoke crack. So if that's what you're referencing, I did none of those things. I stay home now. That's what I do. But that's true. Like, the guilt is just gone. The constant guilt is just gone. Good point.
I didn't actually have the guilt.
Ever?
A little bit, but very little. In fact, it was something I had anxiety over because
you didn't have the guilt.
Right, exactly. Because one of the people that I was very into was John Piper. And he's very into, you are sinning constantly, your very thoughts are sins against God, and you need to be in constant confession of the guilt that is on you, and if you do not feel the guilt, I went looking for this quote and I could not find it, but he said something along the lines of, the only proper attitude to have with God is genuine sorrow for your sin, or genuine sorrow for not having that sorrow. And
Interesting.
yeah,
Mm.
and because I wasn't feeling it, I was thinking there's something wrong with me.
Yeah. Interesting. And
Mhm.
that's interesting you should say that, because I had a therapist once tell me, I asked her, I was like, I never cry after a breakup. I just move on. Like by the end of the day, I'm like happy about it. Does that make me a sociopath? And she said, if you're concerned about being a sociopath, you're not a sociopath. So it's almost like you were concerned about not feeling guilt. So I think that's okay. I think you're a safe person. I don't think there's anything wrong with you. But it's almost like that victimization thing. There's almost a need to want to feel guilty. You're
Mhm.
like, I don't feel guilt. I need to do something or go to a, and I've noticed some people migrate to a more conservative church. Like they go from Baptist to like Calvinist or something like that. Oh, my green screen just fell on my head. Because they don't feel like enough pain or like enough like of what they've been told they're supposed to feel. So then they go searching for it. And you're like, wait, I thought the whole point was that we were trying to like get good enough at God that we don't feel guilt anymore. Like, which is it? I'm going to turn off my camera for a second while I fix this. Hold on. If I can. There we go. Oh, wait, hold on. I'm bad at tech, you guys. There we go.
We've all been there.
What about you, Chad?
Oh, one thing I've loved finding out about myself.
Mm-hmm.
I've loved finding out that that whole thing where I was, considered to be something of a problem child, growing up, not being one to always follow the rules 100% and one to kind of be a little bit loud and to be a little bit pushbacky when I thought things were unfair. And it turns out that wasn't rebellion. That was just me. It wasn't because I was literally told like demons were causing me to do that and demonic influences were having me do that. And, in talking with therapists and like going back and recontextualizing a lot of what happened in my childhood, just learning that it's a very natural, human thing to, want to push the boundaries a little bit growing up. And as you're growing up, try new things and want to see what life is like, on a broader scale. Having the freedom to do that without shame and being able to, actually learn. And by the way, I find even though I'm no expert, okay, like I'm not, I'm barely educated as it is. I grew up in a homeschooling cult. That's why I tell folks, I'm like, whatever I say, take it with a grain of salt. But I love what I have learned about human development, the human brain, and everything like that, because it blew my mind when I learned in my mid-20s that your brain doesn't really fully mature until your mid-20s. I grew up being taught that, kids were basically little adults or should be expected to be. And being able
That's
to
Victorian era.
very much so, but that was what they were literally taught. And you can thank people like Bill Gothard and James Dobson for that. But being able to be human and to accept the limitations of that, and what my own mind and what my own body have been telling me all along, and not attribute it to some like malevolent force that's just causing me to do things that are against what the people in power just happen to want. That has been probably the most freeing and fun thing for me to learn about. The joy of being human, even with all the pain that comes with. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. I was listening, I promise. I just forgot to turn my
you're
camera
cool.
back on.
Can I ask Dr. Kip a question?
Yeah, sure.
I'm really curious as to what it was that finally turned you and took you from your faith. Was it your study of the Old Testament?
No, actually. In fact, it certainly made it easier. I think, but for a long time, I had already started developing a faith and a confession that recognize the huge problems with the Old Testament, with the Bible. And a lot of my career as a biblical scholar, I actually spent trying to sort out how you can make that useful or productive towards just even being a better person or within faith. But for me, so one of the things that I've mentioned this a few times in public before. We have 3 sons. They're all adopted, and they were adopted out of the out of the foster system. So they weren't. My oldest was 4 when we adopted him. My younger 2 were a little bit younger than that, but not much. And they all came with baggage and issues, and it was learning as a parent, because like my kids were not like any of my friends' kids. My kids were not like my nieces and nephews, and definitely not like what my parents were expecting. So we had parenting challenges from the outset. And my wife and I learned a ton through this process, very much like Chad, I think, about just human development, the effects of trauma on the brain, and the importance of attachment and social imprinting, and these sorts of things made it very difficult for me to accept. I think that there was that the Christian God was real, and maybe the last straw was for, and it was for, I think, all of us as a family. But maybe the last straw was that when he was 9 years old, one of my kids we just couldn't even get him into the building when we went to church. And the reason for that is because he was terrified. And it didn't matter what church we went to, and it didn't matter what they were talking about from the pulpit or in Sunday school. He just lived with this debilitating fear that was prompted by his association of church and religion with death. And to my way of thinking, I'm like, this is a problem.
Yeah.
There's something wrong here. And the solutions weren't coming from church. In fact, most of the religious responses, the Christian responses, to my kids, to the ways in which my wife and I were grappling with parenting, were not helpful. So if anything, it just continued to push us further and further away into the warm embrace of secularism.
Yes.
Sorry.
And I think that's a big thing. Yeah, is sometimes it's not whether or not you suffer certain trauma or have certain things happen. It's how the people respond to that, or what they say about that afterward, that really shows you who they are as people, as opposed to how they claim they're going to handle it in the event that it happens. Interesting.
Yeah. My kids are great though. Sorry, I have to tell this one thing. When I was in, I think it was my first or second year, I was doing a postdoc in Norway, and this TV show, Mark Burnett, the producer of Survivor, and I think he did The Apprentice too. He did a television limited series called I think it was just called The Bible, and it was like a dramatization over 6 episodes of the Bible. I know. I can't. Did you see it?
I think I have. You're like unlocking core memories for my brain.
So I was watching. It was probably the first or second episode with one of my kids, and he would have been, I think, 7 or 8 years old at the time. And we're watching the scene where Abraham is receiving instructions from God to offer up Isaac as a sacrifice. And the way that they depicted this was Abraham basically alone and hearing the voices from God in his head on what to do. So he's like, "Hello, God, is that you?" kind of thing. "You want me to do what? With who? When? How's that?" kind of thing. Right. So he's having this conversation, but you never hear God's side of it. And we're watching this, and my kid, he says to me, he goes, "Dad," and I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Is that guy mad?" And
Did he mean
I said,
angry or insane?
no, insane. Like,
Mm.
is he a crazy person? And I'm like, yes, he is.
That sounds like another book title too. Is that guy mad? A study on God and the word of
The life of Abraham.
Yeah, the life of Abraham. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're going to take a break here. And then at 7 o'clock, we're back with Chad for How to Spot a Cult, the musical. So, I'm going to play a little clip just advertising How to Spot a Cult, the musical with Chad Harris, Godless Granny, Dr. Kip. Thank you so much for coming and joining me. I'm so sorry I told everybody a different time to be here. We're working out the kinks for next year. I'm learning all the things to do differently for next year. But everybody in the chat, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us. Pragmatic Crystal, thank you so much for putting everybody's links in the chat and always being just a really, really great mod. Appreciate your work. And we'll see you back at 7 p.m. Central Time. So if you need to Google what time that is in your time, I don't blame you. I would have to do that too if I didn't always live in Central. But thank you everybody for helping me put this together, and we will see you at 7. But first, I'm going to play and now we're all back. All right, bye everybody. See you at 7.
Thank you.
Bye.
Dr. Kip, I've been wanting to have you on my show for a while, but I've been waiting till I come up with a topic that is worthy of your time. And I'm almost there. So I'll be getting in touch with you as soon as I have that.
I was I actually I watched one of your I think it was an older one, but I watched one of your streams this last weekend yesterday with Joe Inslee, the guy with the enormous beard. I just wanted to say that was nicely done.
Thank
Very
you.
nicely done.
You know what I thought was absolutely bonkers about that one? He took
so many things.
Well, the most bonkers is that he took and posted the entire video on his own channel, and his own followers said, "That woman owned you."
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I'm going to go watch this now. That's wild.
That's
hilarious.
It's very good. Oh, there's
everybody in the chat. Go watch it, and then we'll see you at 7. Bye.
Awesome. Later.
See ya.
Oh, damn. Hi.